Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
This is May 15th, and we're on episode 34, Back to Sweden.
Back to Sweden. Hey, Kathleen. Thanks for the early good morning shout out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
So here we are talking about Sweden, but actually first we're going to talk about propaganda. That's what kind of got us going on this.
Yes. We were talking before, like there's, one way of framing this that we were talking about before we started this is just how the right wing in general is just better at propaganda. And there's probably all kinds of reasons for this, but right now we're seeing how that works.
Yeah.
Particularly with, which we'll use Sweden as an example here.
Right.
In a couple of minutes.
Right. Yeah, it really is an interesting thing. I mean, say what you want about the GOP and Trump and all of his minions and all of this, but I mean, the fact is that for the last number of years, I mean, they have just kicked the Democrats' ass at propaganda. I mean, they just are so much better at taking just about anything and spinning it in a way that, sounds good to this huge number of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then meanwhile, the Democrats mostly say a lot of dumb things that tend to turn people off. And it's weird. I mean, I don't really get it.
I mean, I think they're like, if I'm charitable towards Democrats, which is not typical for me, I think there is something to be said that conservatism in America tends to be a more simplifying narrative, whereas being progressive tends to be more of a nuancing sort of thing. So if you're moving towards simplification, rhetoric is easier. And so it makes sense that, Republican talking points can fit on a bumper sticker, whereas Democratic ones can't as much. So that's my charitable spin on it. But the other piece of it is there is a traditional pressure points that the left has used that the Democrats have just walked away. Like the whole new Democratic movement is moving away from the sort of rhetoric that even like Bernie Sanders was using. And why he was so successful is he was this crotchety old white guy, but he was successful because of retrieving this sort of talking points that are at the heart of the left in America.
Well, right. And I mean, you've talked about this before, that there is a tradition on the left of being able to generate slogans, being able to generate spin, being able to generate talking points that catch people's attention. So it's not like the left has never done this.
No.
Right? I mean, but we see, and you could kind of see this with this pandemic video. Right. So
I'm glad we're bringing that back in.
Yeah. So the point, which you should not watch, but so then there were these responses which were hilarious, right? So there were these ones that would say, if you thought the pandemic video is good, you need to read this, and I would click on it and it would be like this 40-page document that after 30 seconds of reading it, I was just asleep. I was just bored. And I'm like, nobody's going to read this. Right? And that was kind of an example of that, right? That the response to this video was so terrible that there's no way that anybody that was convinced by the video would ever get through this other thing and be unconvinced by it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There's
a couple of comments coming early. Ceres writes, GOP understood marketing. Democrats ignored Lakoff's suggestions on framing their languages.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, again, Ceres, thanks for being on yesterday. If folks did not catch it, we had a great discussion with her. I really recommend recommend watching that. Yeah, so this gets us to this thing about Sweden. So what does Sweden have to do with any of this? So again, Sweden has had this very interesting kind of unique response to the coronavirus, where they have had this very clear national plan to basically isolate older, vulnerable populations. And then for younger, less vulnerable populations, rely a lot on voluntary distancing, voluntary decrease of movement within the country. And, you know, basically they've been able to deal with this without a great deal of economic shutdown. And, you know, they definitely had cases. Early on, they did not do a great job at kind of sealing off nursing homes and things. And so, you know, their death rate has been significant. But they've gotten better at that as time has gone on. So the death rate has very much decreased over the last few weeks. And, you know, in a lot of ways, they've gone about their business. And so, you know, the GOP in America is now using Sweden as this great example of why we should open up here. Right. And, you know, Tucker Carlson gets on Fox and goes, well, look, Sweden hasn't done anything and they're doing great. And the crazy thing about this, which most people do not seem to get or realize, right, is that the reason Sweden was able to do what they did is because, as a social democratic country, they have many, many things in place in their society that were sort of preventative, that were allowing them to pursue the strategy that they did, right? So they have universal health care, they have universal child care, they have high-speed internet to every part of the country, even the most remote village, you know, north of the Arctic Circle. They already had a huge percentage of their population working from home. They had very liberal, good work policies, great public transportation. They have a very high percentage of people living by themselves. They have a lot of great social welfare sorts of things in places. Right now, of course, these are all policies that the GOP opposes, right? But those are the exact things that allow them to be successful at doing what they're doing. And if we had tried to do what they did from the beginning, I mean, we would now have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people dead. I mean, there's absolutely no way that we would be in a situation to be able to do what they did. And yet now, on the other side of this, the GOP can parade them out and go, oh, look, you know, we can open up. Like, look what Sweden did. It was great. And it's sort of madness, but it is, you know, it's kind of this brilliant move on their part from a propaganda point of view.
Yeah, and it's this gets to Kathleen's comment from earlier. It's easier to make up a false narrative than to promote a more ambiguous story. I mean, in this sense, the false narrative, to me, part of the operating system of why they can get away with this is, I would imagine, and it'd be great if there are any really conservative people watching, I'd love your comments on this, but it seems to me that this idea that America is the best at everything, this exceptionalism, is underneath it all. Because the idea that somehow Sweden could be better than us at all these things is just unfathomable. So it ends up being this weird, it's also this weird situation where we will criticize the Scandinavian countries for being liberal, but they're really, really white, so we'll still use them as positive examples instead of those Asian countries. Like, there's some of that stuff going on there too.
Right.
It's like there are wayward cousins.
Yeah. Well, and then again, you know, the Democratic Party. See, to me, the Democrats, they should be all over this, right? Now, of course, the problem is the Democratic Party doesn't even support most of these social democratic policies, right? So, so Joe Biden actually gets up and says, well, national health care wouldn't have helped any of this, right? Which is like, okay, could we shoot ourselves in the foot even more, right? So they miss an opportunity for their own positive kind of propaganda, and then sort of cede the territory to the Fox News crowd.
Earlier, Sari's brought up George Lakoff's book, and it's called "Don't Think of the Elephant," and it's about frames and language. So, if you want to read something, there's other books out there about the left's problems with rhetoric. But that's a good one to look at.
And it sort of goes off of that joke of when you say to somebody, "Don't think of an elephant," you immediately think of an elephant. So I hope you're all thinking of elephants right now.
I am now. Catherine writes, yes, it's so weird to see alt-right propaganda praising Sweden now. Right. Sweden has been a favorite target for conspiracy theory examples about why socialism is evil.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, all along and all leading up to, and again, the Democratic Party numerous times, right? Hillary Clinton got up and said, well, we're not Denmark, and so even the Democrats used this to bash Bernie Sanders, right? And to get him out of the race. And so they missed an opportunity there. So they shit all over it. And then, right now the GOP is coming around and they're like, oh, this will be great. Like, let's use them as an example for why we should all go to the bar. And it's a really fascinating study in that kind of use of propaganda, different examples. And again, to my mind, I'm like, yeah, Sweden is actually great, and what they've done is great, and I would love for us to have been able to do some kind of version of that. But the problem is, in order to do that, you have to invest in prevention. And of course, this is something that we've talked about in the medical realm, right, for years, is that, part of the problem with our medical system is we invest almost nothing in prevention. And it really is true that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so, if you already have internet to every household in your country, it's a lot easier to shelter in place right off the bat, right?
Kids can do school easily from home if good internet, and if you have a high standard of living and people have computers, which again, people, I don't know if, I think a lot of people in the US don't realize how many people don't have access to that in this country. That's another thing that I think people just don't get. Just because we're the best.
Right.
Of course. If you don't have it, it's your own fault.
Yeah, all right. I mean, millions and millions of people, and even people who have had sort of halfway decent internet, right? I mean, one of the things, and like our son Max, who's been doing a lot of now online teaching and teaches little kids music and was teaching college kids, and was saying, well, one of the things that was happening was that, so the household may have internet, but now suddenly you've got 5 people at home trying to use the same internet. You've got your 3 kids online, you've got your parents both at home working. Well, suddenly the internet doesn't work anymore, right? And so you've got a whole group of people that don't have it at all. But then you also have an even bigger group of people that, because we haven't considered this a public utility, they don't have good internet, and so that's made trying to engage the pandemic even more difficult. Whereas if you have all of that to begin with, it's not even something you have to worry about when you need it. What else is Catherine commented on?
Relative brainwashed by conservative Christian talk radio. Do you want us to end up like Sweden? I don't know how to do the talk. Well, more like Norway, but yes, I do. That's the other thing. It's like, this gets back to the propaganda piece. It's just the way that conservatives focus on local is kind of amazing. So focus on winning.
Say more about what you mean by that.
So political energy, so much is put on the state level so that they can gerrymander the shit out of everything. And then a lot of the communication is like, I don't know, in the 80s, whatever it was, they're like, you know what we should do? I know the future's in television, but we're going to pump conservative radio everywhere. And, there's been attempts at having the left version of it that's failed and is weak sauce because, they're just better. And so that strategy was brilliant, like focusing on entertainment, like a Fox News kind of, way of doing this entertaining type news that's just very skewed like this, it's evil, but it's brilliant.
Yep. Yeah, no, exactly. And again, it's sort of that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Mm-hmm. If you, and, the woman, Ekta Molkurin, who wrote this book about how to lose a country in 7 steps, talks a lot about this, actually, how the right has done all this hard work, especially in rural areas, kind of like laying the groundwork for creating this fascist party. And the left basically just kind of got lazy and stopped doing this stuff. Now that's a big problem. So we got some great questions and comments. Kathleen's question:
is it too late to teach critical thinking skills to the masses?
Well, I don't know that it's too late, but again, it's that sort of prevention versus cure thing, right? So right. I mean, we're way behind on that. We've gutted our educational system in many, many ways. Critical thinking skills have gone out the window in many, many ways. And so now you're playing catch up, and it's a lot harder to play catch up. And so it's not necessarily too late, but it's just that it's a lot harder to do something like that on the back end than on the front end. Hopefully we will learn from this pandemic that the internet needs to be a utility, and we need to have that in every household, just like we have electricity and running water. But that's going to take a lot longer to do than if it was already in place now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Is Sweden much different from Norway with their society and results and all? I don't know how Norway's been handling this.
Yeah, well, no, so it is actually different. So Norway has taken the approach that the most of the other European countries and some of the Asian countries have taken, with doing a much more significant shutdown. And again, they've been very effective at that. And so their death rate, at least early on and in total, is much lower than Sweden. But they also now have the problem that their economy is much more shattered, and so they're having to open up in a strategic kind of way. But my guess is that they will be able to do that again much more effectively because of a lot of the social supports that they have in place, and the people will be suffering along the way much less than they would be otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Heather writes, sadly true, we're all living in fiber optic glass houses.
Yes, I like that image. So I think, so one of the questions that comes up for me then is sort of why isn't there a significant and strong kind of movement that's taking on some of these important social care issues, and then the flip side of that is this is something that we could really advocate for, and I believe it was actually just today or yesterday, there is now this combined Sanders-Biden policy team that's been put together with people from each camp that are working on these different issues. Which is really great. And, I think that we need to really advocate that. I mean, if this pandemic does not show us that we need these kinds of social support things, I don't know what's going to tell us that. But yeah, I think we need to really advocate for it a great deal. Catherine's got a comment about Norway.
I lived in Norway for 3+ years and had free health care even as a temporary immigrant. Got paid enough to live on at my low-wage PCA temp job and went to grad school for $500 a year. But Scandinavia is far enough away to make the GOP imaginary scare propaganda seem plausible to people who've never been there.
Right. Well, yeah, and again, it's imaginary scare propaganda when they're running against those policies, and now it's like, oh, they're doing a great job. Let's do that same thing. So, and I do think that part of the propaganda issue, this was one of the things we were talking about before, is that I really think that in order to do some of this stuff effectively, right, you have to have no shame. I mean, you just have to be okay with saying whatever crazy stuff you need to say, even as you know that it's not true or that it's some sort of very bizarre twisting of reality. And so I do think that is a factor in all of this, that, you just don't care like how much nonsense you're spewing.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I feel like the way that right-wing propaganda appeals is different too. Like it works kind of at more of a fear type level. Although the left tries to do fear mongering too, it's just they're not good at it. And then the right appeals to its core base, whereas Democrats don't. Like part of the whole shift that happened in the late '80s and on was Democrats trying to be the biggest tent party that it could be, and try to like appeal to people rather than take the lead on something. That's kind of how it seems to me. And so then, that's, workers, the traditional kind of base of the Democratic Party just became, their talking points got pushed more and more to the side, and it became more of a neoliberal party. So now there's no way to fire people up around neoliberalism.
Right, which we can see with the current candidate who is, and this is just unbelievable to me. So Joe Biden, they've been keeping for about 40 or 50 years or something. They have this one category of voter enthusiasm for the candidate. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden has the lowest voter enthusiasm for any presidential candidate since they started tracking voter enthusiasm, which just seems to make a ton of sense that that's the person you want to run. So, yeah. So it's a very, very odd situation, and again, to me, I think that the left should be all over the Swedish example of basically saying, hey, look, like this is what you can do if you have a sane society, right? And in this age where we are going to be hit by one, climate change crisis after another, the best thing you can do is invest in prevention. Like we need to invest in resilient societies that are taking care of people. And if you do that, the crisis will still be hard, right? Again, I mean, a bunch of folks have died and it's sad and that's really difficult. But you will be able to get through the crises in the best possible way. And isn't that better than, constantly trying to play catch up after catch up after catch up, when you've got these things rolling in one after another.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially as we're going to see more and more of these sorts of situations as climate change affects things and more pandemics come about. Mm-hmm. We're going to see in the immigration crisis, it's just going to put more and more burden on the system. And this is where the right-wing talking points will, even though it's messed up, it'll start like having more power. Like this is the thing, we've been saying before in this show, that people are just assuming that this might bring out the best in people. But right now, everything's intensifying and it's just easier to fascist right now. It's just easier to get it because like scapegoating, blaming people, it's just a lot easier. I mean, it's easy to propagandize around that.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that you've got the two things. It's easier to propagandize. And then the other thing is that it's easier to give in to despair.
Yes.
Right. And so, and I do think that those two kind of go hand in hand, like that the more despair there is, the easier it is to buy into some sort of nonsensical propaganda. And, you know, and to me, when you look at what's happened in Wisconsin in the last 2 days, I feel like that's part of what you're seeing, right? Is that, so, you know, the Supreme Court threw out the shelter at home thing. And of course, they did that on Zoom while they were all sheltered at home because, you know, it's too dangerous for them to meet together in one place. You know, the irony of that is tremendous. And the next, well, not even the next day, like within 10 minutes, you know, you had these bars just filled with people, just flooded with people. And I think part of that is that, you know, there's a despair piece to that of just like, well, whatever, you know, we're going to do, and whatever happens, happens, and, you know, or we're just going to listen to some, you know, thing in our head that's like, well, you know, Swedish people, they're all at bars, so we can be at bars too. And you did. You had all these photographs, you know, Tucker Carlson put up all these photos of young people in Sweden at bars. And then people are like, okay, great. Well, we'll do that as well. And, yeah, and it feeds that whole mentality.
Mm-hmm. We're coming up on our last few minutes, so if people have any comments or questions, now's the time to throw them out there before you lose your opportunity forever.
Or at least until Monday.
Or at least until Monday. But who knows if Monday will come.
Right.
These are hard times. Yeah, and so this, I mean, it comes back to this comment earlier from Kathleen, I think, about how you teach critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is it's hard to do that. Like, people are going to go along with the dominant myths, and you can't really effectively teach every individual to be a free thinker and make their own decisions very well. Like, that's why you have to have, that's why narratives matter. Like, and the problem is, like, the left, both kind of the Democrat left, which is America's left, and the far left, which I would, you know, the radical folks like me and you, we're not as good at creating a cohesive narrative as the right. And so in this situation with the Sweden thing, like, how would even the Democrats respond to it? They'd say, well, here's 10 statistics about why you're wrong.
Right.
You can't appeal to a cohesive, powerful narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as you know, as we were talking about, though, before the show started, I mean, actually, you know, Bernie Sanders was quite successful at doing this, right? And again, if you listen to Bernie, I mean, you know, he was great at staying on message, right? And he did. He had a number of very simple talking points, and no matter what you asked him about, he could turn around to, we need universal health care, right? I mean, you could ask him about, you know, asparagus, and he would be like, you know, if you eat too much asparagus, you get sick. And then if you go to the doctor, you're not going to be able to afford it. We need universal health care. Like, no matter what, he could turn it around to that.
Here's a great comment. We need Ernesto Cardenals, which we'll have to explain who that is, for crafting narratives. Yes. Ernesto Cardenal, like, he was or is the poet laureate of Nicaragua, a priest who was kind of part of the Sandinista revolution, liberation theologian, buddies with Thomas Merton. So bringing poetry and radical vision together, and to help tap into imagination, which, again, like, we do need people like Ernesto Cardenal. We need these poetic, and Bernie Sanders, you wouldn't want to necessarily call him a poet, but he did create an imagination for something that it's not like he was unique in this. He's just a very good communicator, and people don't even think he's a good communicator. That's how good of a communicator he was. People don't realize that he studied film, like that. He knows how to craft a narrative, and some crotchety, unappealing old white guy was able to do that because of the power of story. And we need more of that. And we can do better than, I think we can do better than Bernie Sanders. Like, I think we need to keep trying and pushing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so again, I think in each of our own lives, we need to be listening for, who are those poets? What is the imagination? How can we start casting new stories, new narratives, new dreams? Because that's what appeals to people. I mean, critical thinking is great, but that combined with poetry is even better.
Yeah. And here's a concluding comment from Catherine. I'm obviously oversimplifying. Norway has problems too, including many caused by the current rise of racist right-wing politics. But I was still stunned by how much less unnecessarily miserable it was to be poor in Norway than in the US. Right. And this is a good reminder, like, it's not just, we need to be more like Scandinavia and things will get better, because these countries that have these strong social safety nets are also being pulled rightward. Mm-hmm. So this is it's an epidemic. Yep. Though it's to me, it's a worse pandemic than the viral pandemic that we're experiencing now, because and you don't see very many spots in the world where you see a left that's as powerful, that's stirring up the imagination like that. Yeah.
So we need to do that.
Let's do that. That's by Monday. We expect everyone to do that.
Everybody send us your slogan. We'll have one episode of Transmission where all we'll do is read cool slogans. So,
let's do it.
All right. We'll see you then.
And we'll do it as a freestyle beat poem. It'll be great.
There we go. Thanks for listening.
See you Monday.
Bye.